Intro. The 1930s was a time period that was radically different for parts of the world, as continuing what happened from the previous decade. The Great Depression was still going strong in the United States and in Europe, especially with countries like Germany and Italy. Authoritarianism was also starting to take a big rise with the rise of people we all know. Can't really say the names, but you know the names since it's the most famous German leader, probably. The rise of people like him and the one from Italy helped form what would culminate in World War II. And that really is the most important aspect of the 1930s, just due to the consequences of these things. But first, we should go over why each of these things are important in the grand scheme of human history in the decades. While the Great Depression started in 1929, it continued on for many, many years just because economically many things hurt people's ability to pay for goods and stuff relating to things that keep GDP high for a country. After the initial crash of the stock market, there were still 3 years left for Hoover in office, and in 1930, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act was passed. This is what killed international trade, basically, because that's what tariffs do. In this case, it hurt the farmers of America because they couldn't sell their crops to other countries because once the tariffs were enacted, other countries put on retaliatory tariffs. And bim bam bang, prices just went up for everyone. That's what usually happens when these things are implemented. The idea behind it is that if a tariff is meant for one thing, it will really work on everything all at once. That's the mentality behind it. Nope, Buckster, that is not how that works. You and I both drink water, but I'm not going to waterboard you to drink water. That would just make you choke. That's what happened because they thought it would help, because surely the tariffs we had before helped. Those tariffs being the one from the previous decade under the other administrations. It isolated America a lot more to the world, and with America being such a big market, was going to hurt the markets a lot more with isolation. You can't be the largest market and not expect to import anything. That's how you kill the world market. It's what led to the Great Depression, as it was a big bubble with no regulations on anything. Now, there is a saying that the freer the market, the freer the people, that some people follow. Now, why? But the problem with this is the idea that you can't have no regulations or intervention because bubbles will and have popped up forever. And they just pop. Bang, I poke a needle in it, it's gone. Anything can be a bubble if unregulated for a long period of time. And for this, we can look at the stock market, like the big bubble, and how it crashed. Back then, banks did not have to guarantee your money to you. So when the markets crashed, a lot of people were left with nothing to their name. All their money, all their stocks, they were just gone. So it was bad for a lot of people. When you have nothing to your name, well, let's just say you don't have a home anymore. Bang, I take that. That's what happened to a lot of people through the Hoover presidency after the stock crash. A lot of people built these things called Hoovervilles because there was so little that went around in terms of money and things that people who had lost their home were forced to build homes out of scraps and metal, tin cans basically, because nowhere was hiring. They've realized that the Roaring '20s was actually a system not made for them, and it was made for a select few people in the end. So that's why in the election of 1932, it was such a massive landslide, because this was a depression that was hurting everyone. It was something that people knew needed changing, and so they voted on the actual change. In 1932, there was a massive landslide because when there's something bad happening to this scale, the current system is just known not to work. And so the idea of the New Deal is making a government that works for the people to help them through this, rather than working for the private sector and putting people second, like it had kind of been doing for most of the previous decade. It's an economy where stock prices don't matter as much as human lives and jobs. My imaginary number doesn't matter? Whoa. It was the thing that inspired a lot of modern things people fight for. One of the things introduced by the New Deal was Social Security, because a lot of old people who lost everything they owned couldn't really get a form of payment, since they can't work, because they're old. So the Social Security Act was made to make sure that old people could at least get some form of payment, since that's how people survive in one way or another. And now a lot of people continue to use Social Security because that's a good system that's in place. Another thing that was put in place was the CCC, which is the Department of Government that gave jobs to the people who didn't have them and had them focus on nature conservation efforts, which is good because, nature is actually cool and awesome like that, but I don't know, that for some reason it may not be a universal take. The New Deal also really relied on a big trust in the government, which is something that isn't the same as it was back then. Back then, people didn't expect a lot out of their government. It was really just the military and taxes that they had to pay. But during the New Deal, people expected more from the government and even wrote letters to FDR when they didn't get their Social Security payments. It was better to see the government intervene in things that it should intervene in, like workers' rights and the economy, because just letting it be doesn't really work if it's in a state of failing. The New Deal also showed that it worked when it was able to stabilize the economy and raise the GDP over the course of 6 years, which is kind of impressive because usually by that time there's a recession or something that happens. So the New Deal overall was a success, probably, most likely, and obviously made him, like FDR, a popular president. I mean, when you're working for the entirety of the working class people, you're bound to gain respect from them in some way or form. And that's what happened in 1936. The other election that happened in this decade, it's the one was the highest percentage of electoral college points claimed, other than like the ones where they were unopposed, and that being 523 to 8, which is crazy because the only two states that didn't vote for FDR are Vermont and Maine, which are the two names that Alf Landon, the opponent, named his horses. So there's that, which basically said that the New Deal works for the people because that's what has worked and shown to work overall, so they wanted it. The people saw it as something that worked for them, actually, which is why FDR won so many states. That's how you win states like that. You just have to be charismatic and let the people think your policies are working and actually show them that effort. But other than that, the New Deal had its skeptics, like every policy plan does, but it was the main thing that dominated the economy for the decade. So there wasn't enough to really stop it. It also slowly brought back the economy instead of fully bringing it back quicker, which is probably better in the long term, because if you have too fast of an economic bounce back, you end up with high inflation because everyone's coming back to buy stuff. All of a sudden, there's 1 million people buying toilet paper and stuff. All the low prices from before are going to bounce back to maybe even higher than their original price, because you can't keep up with the supply and demand. Teach a parrot to say supply and demand and you have an economist. Even though it takes some time to bring back something that's been happening for 3 years and one of the worst things to happen in economics, it really wasn't going to come back instantly or in a few years. Which is why it's weird. People are like, because some people are honestly like, no, he extended the depression. Brother, what do you expect to happen in a depression? Another way that the country, luckily, also believed in the policies is the fireside chat that went on through the magic invention of the radio back in the late day. This let everyone hear the president's voice and hear a relaxing talk about why policies worked and how they actually would help the people, Remember, this was during a time where people could listen to one unified source of information, and that's how they really got their news. Back then, they didn't have Book Talk, they didn't have Morning Glory Milking Farm, so they kind of had one main source, really. There wasn't everywhere and a half to, like, communicate with people. They had one main communications thing that would get to most of America, and some of rural America later on. But these chats were good in actually making sure people knew what was happening, and they were caught up on new policies and stuff. It was a good way to show that the people can get their information and trust the government as they could trust it back. And they could listen and hear policies that would work for them. It's what they needed back then, as well as an economic depression would usually do that. But trust is something that's hard to form with the public, but it depends on how you do it. Because sometimes people just struggle with that in their presidencies. The rise of dictatorships and the idea of authoritarianism rose a lot in Europe during the 1930s and the 1920s a little bit, specifically in the Axis power countries like Germany and Italy. Italy's dictatorship under Mussolini began really in the 1920s when he was elected, in quotes, in 1922, and he held the position for a while after that throughout this decade as well. He became a dictator of Italy and wanted to expand the territory of Italy because back in World War I, they were promised a lot of land if they helped out the Allied powers defeat the Central powers. Of course, when this was done, they got a sliver of bread compared to what they were promised, which really made every hashtag Italian mad at that. So Mussolini was able to take over the country and basically alter how the power balance was, since he just wanted to do that, basically. And his party was known as the National Fascist Party in Italy, and that's basically what happened. Before this decade, Mussolini made Italy a police state where it was run mainly by the police, and democracy, it's a little dead. There was a lot of control on the people, and throughout the decade, in Mussolini's prime ministership, there were, of course, high tariffs imposed on countries, because that's what nationalism actually is. Was these tariffs, a lot of farmers got hurt, as expected, since they couldn't sell their crops overseas for a profit, and had to rely more on national consumption during the time. So, sucks to suck, I guess. As you would expect, national consumption kind of fell, so it wasn't really looking good for the economy overall, but no guys, we need to prove we are the best. This was the motto back then, which is why Italy got into a lot of conflicts on its not boot-shaped borders, because this was a time period where empires were still physically visible on a map, and still existed like that. Italy at the time had Libya and had other countries in Africa kind of just scattered about. The war in Ethiopia that happened gave Italy more land by the end of the decade, so they just needed a little bit more land when the war started. But also during this time, they made friends with another fascist-ran country, that being Germany. Now, can't really say the name, so let's just call him the Painter, for simplicity's sake. Now, the way the Painter got to rise to this power was being appointed chancellor by the president at the time, Hindenburg. This happened because they wanted someone who could expand the reach and popularity of the party they were in, and the Painter seemed like a good person at the time to do that, really. Little did they know he would become a dictator and one of the most dangerous people to ever govern a powerful country. Germany's economy recovered kind of quickly after the Painter took over, but that came with the cost of inflation and longer working hours in Germany during the time. Also because they were preparing their economy a lot suspiciously for war. What, guys? Red arrow and circle pointing to Germany? But do not fret, that was the job of Horace Schott, who was the Minister of Economics appointed by the Painter. This was all also due to the idea that the Painters Party put on the German people that the Aryan race of people are better, in quotes, like, than everyone else because everyone else is subhuman. What? What? It's racism, and it's also just the idea of eugenics and all that. It's the usage of propaganda to rise to the top and using heavy emotional weight to make people think that something's going on with our country. That's, like, wrong when it's clearly not true. So it's wrong. The word authoritarianism means to use excess force to keep obedience in people in exchange for their freedoms, which is what happened in Germany this decade. Obedience for leaders, basically, was the matter, what mattered in the long run, because they wanted to make sure everyone had the same ideas as them. They literally had the thought police over here. No thoughts against our tyrannical rule allowed here, sir. Please take that outside our country. It's worse when these authoritarian forces are used to promote the worst ideas ever conceived, possibly. Might be, possibly. It's up on that list. It's all just to make sure they can stay on top. The idea of, quote, race purity is what the painter was really inspired by, because he blamed all the problems he ever faced on things like Jewish people and anyone not white with blonde hair and blue eyes. His dream girl may be a model today, just by that appearance, since it's very vague and kind of, like, contradictory many ways to label someone. It's weird. I don't know. Probably would be a model today. But authority wasn't something only expressed by Germany. It was also expressed by Italy and Japan. Japan's a little more different from Germany and Italy, since it's a different type of how it was run. So that's not really going to be covered, because the types of authority are different in ways. But back to Germany and Italy and their dictators. In these countries, people who were saying anything at all that was different from what the knowledge, in quotes, in heavy quotes, that they wanted to spread were thrown out of the country or brought to one of their special camps, basically. Like, boom, I send you off in train or something. I send you to the thought police. It's a way of showing that they have total control over people who don't agree with them. That's what a dictatorship really is in the real world. But the dictatorship leads to a lot of things. Like, for example, an extortion of power and what feels like a way to show that you were more powerful, or something to push an agenda that would let you hold more power. That's what they did to gain these powers in Europe. Power is something you have to exert to show you have it, but the amount you have to exert will always be a moving gatepost. You will have to exert more power over time to show that you still have that power, because in a dictatorship, whoa. And this is because people are, for the most part, usually power hungry. The idea of power is usually limitless. So when you have this power and you think it is just, oh, so swell, so much, and it will make you happier, and it doesn't, let's just say you're going to have a bad day. It's like, it goes up and down. It goes up and down with your dopamine. It's exactly like dopamine, for example, which you would get. If you've ever hit a vape before in your life, you'll probably understand dopamine cycles. That's just very similar. The first hit of a vape might be the most amazing feeling you ever feel and you will ever experience. It's like sunshine and rainbows and cotton candy all over. So you constantly try to reach that high, but that's all it is, a high. You'll never reach it again, but that's what you're on the search for, and that's what you will be on the search for. So that's what really fuels your addiction. That and the nicotine. Back to Germany and Italy, because this is what their leaders wanted. Not the vapes, but to exert power, and they had to exert more and more and more to chase that dopamine in a way, to show the people that they also had this power as well. And that's what happened in a way in Europe, was Germany and Italy mainly. More so Germany, as for them it was a mix of wanting to exert more power, but also to eradicate all the other, quote, subhuman ethnicities. That's how they would like to quote it, which, just propaganda. That's what led to the start of World War II, which did indeed start in this decade. It really starts with the invasion of Poland in September. Other than that, most of the wars left in the next decade, as that's the decade that actually sees the war and the efforts put towards it and the effects of it afterwards. That in it of itself is a very important thing to talk about, like World War II and the post-world world order. But that's next decade, technically. Overall, the decade of the 1930s really was marked by economic depression in America, and a lot of other countries too, because it was the Great Depression, but mainly America due to its size and market share for companies at the time. But it really is dichotomized with how Europe had its leadership, whereas more dictators and full of making themselves feel better by putting others down, versus the American New Deal. Just the typical hierarchy, I'm better than you type mentality in actions. It's just bullying, but in more fancy words. But dictatorship grew in Europe, also because there had never been anything like it. So they didn't really have any safe measures to protect themselves against something like this. But it leads into a decade that has the worst human events in history. But that's for next time. So, But that really is about it for the 1930s. So if you have thoughts about it, you can comment them down below if you want. And if you want to like and subscribe, pretty please.